Chapter 1: The Foggy Night by the Tavern. Fog blanketed East London like a gray, oppressive curtain, so thick that the dim streetlights were reduced to faint, flickering specks in the damp darkness. Inside the Rusty Anchor, a small pub tucked away on a narrow cobblestone street, the warmth from an old fireplace clashed with the bone-chilling cold outside. The crackling of burning logs mingled with the raucous laughter of regular patrons, dock workers, truck drivers, and a few drunken middle-aged men, creating a chaotic yet familiar symphony for Grace Evans. Grace, 25, stood behind the bar, her cold, trembling hands shaking slightly as she poured a pint of dark beer from the tap. Her tight black uniform, a shirt and short apron, was frayed at the edges, but she maintained a neat appearance, her brown hair tied up high, revealing sharp cheekbones and gray-blue eyes that always glinted with a wary edge. Tonight was an extra shift, the only thing keeping her and her younger sister Lily afloat through this harsh winter. Their mother had died of lung disease 3 years ago, leaving the two sisters in a rundown apartment with an unpaid medical debt. Their father was a faceless mystery, a man who'd abandoned them before Grace was even born. She'd learned not to rely on anyone but herself. "Oi, Grace! Another round for us!" A regular shouted from the corner, his face flushed red from liquor, waving an empty pint glass like it was a trophy. "Hold on, Charlie," Grace replied, her voice flat and emotionless. She slid the beer across the counter, collected the tarnished coins, and returned to her work, her eyes skimming the crowd without really seeing anyone. To her, they were just shadows, people who came and went, leaving nothing behind but a few coins and the stench of booze. The pub door suddenly swung open, ushering in a gust of icy wind and a few droplets from the foggy mist outside. Grace looked up, her breath catching as a man stepped inside. He was tall, with a calm demeanor that stood out sharply against the rough regulars. His long black overcoat, damp with mist, clung to a solid frame, a few droplets rolling down the expensive fabric. His dark hair was slightly tousled, but his eyes, a deep melancholic green, like a winter sky, instantly drew her in. He sat at a wooden table near the fireplace, saying nothing, just quietly watching the flames. Grace felt her heart skip a beat, though she didn't know why. There was something about him, a stillness, a discreet loneliness, that made it impossible for her to look away. "1 pint of Guinness," he said, his voice low and clear, carrying a hint of an upper-class English accent, but without arrogance. She nodded, pouring the beer with hands clumsy from the cold, then brought it to his table. "Thanks," he said, glancing up at her briefly, just long enough for their eyes to meet. Grace turned away quickly, a flush creeping up her cheeks despite the chill in the pub. The night dragged on slowly. The regulars gradually thinned out, stumbling off with loud laughs and unsteady steps. By nearly midnight, only Grace and the stranger remained in the pub. She started cleaning up, wiping the counter, stacking chairs, trying not to notice him. But as she locked the front door and prepared to turn off the lights, his voice cut through from the corner. "The fog's too thick. I'm afraid I can't go anywhere tonight." Grace turned back, seeing him stand, his overcoat still damp. "My car's parked a few streets away, but I'm not sure I can find my way in this weather," he added, his tone gentle but tinged with reluctance. She bit her lip, hesitating. The Rusty Anchor wasn't a place for overnight guests, but the cold and fog outside were like an unspoken threat. "You can stay here until the fog clears," she said, her voice firmer than she intended. "I've got a small room behind the bar, warm enough to get through the night." He nodded, not arguing. "Thank you, I'm James." "Grace," she replied curtly, then led him through the old wooden door behind the counter. The small room had only a narrow bed, a little wooden table, and an ancient oil lamp casting a weak yellow glow. James shed his overcoat, hanging it on a hook, revealing an expensive gray suit underneath. Grace wondered who he was. A man dressed like that didn't belong in East London, a place of muddy streets and broken dreams. They sat across from each other on the bed, Grace at one end, James at the other. The distance between them just enough to maintain separation, but not enough to dispel the strange tension growing in the air. "You don't seem like the type who comes here," Grace said, breaking the silence. James gave a faint smile, his gaze drifting to the oil lamp. I just got back from New York, 15 years there, but London's still home, though not how I remember it. New York, Grace echoed, a hint of awe in her voice. I've never left London. What's it like there? Beautiful but lonely, he replied, his voice dropping. Skyscrapers, lights that never go out, but no one really sees each other. I went there to escape, but ended up feeling more lost. Grace listened, sensing an invisible thread pulling her closer to him. I've wanted to escape too, she said, her voice softening. My mom died 3 years ago, leaving me and my sister. I work day and night so Lily can go to university, but some days, I just want to drop everything and run far away. James looked at her, his eyes softening. You're stronger than you realize, Grace. Not everyone could do that. His words slipped through the cracks in her heart like a warm breeze. Grace didn't know why she was telling him, a stranger, things she'd never shared with anyone, not even Lily. Maybe it was his eyes, sad yet sincere, as if he understood her pain without needing her to explain. They kept talking, from small things, the smell of toasted bread in London's fog, the sound of ship horns in New York, to deeper scars. James spoke of his younger brother, who died in a car accident 15 years ago, a memory that drove him to leave England to avoid facing the grief. Sometimes I think it was my fault, he said, his voice rough, his hand tightening around a cold pint glass. I was driving that night. If I'd been more careful. Grace placed her hand on his, an instinctive gesture she didn't pause to consider. Don't keep blaming yourself, she said, her voice trembling. I used to think if I'd worked harder, my mom wouldn't have died. But sometimes life doesn't give us a choice. In that moment, the space between them shrank. James looked up, his gaze locking onto hers. The fire in the hearth outside had dwindled, leaving only the faint glow of the oil lamp. But the small room seemed to grow warmer. He leaned in slowly, as if silently asking her permission. Grace didn't pull back. When his lips met hers, it was gentle like a question, then fierce like an answer. They fell onto the narrow bed, his hands threading through her hair, their breasts mingling in the cramped space. That night, amid London's fog and cold, they forgot their loneliness, leaving reason behind the old wooden door. The next morning, when Grace woke, the bed was empty. James was gone, no goodbye, no trace, except for a small silver pen engraved with J.H. lying on the floor. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the letters, her heart heavy. Just one night, she told herself, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep and an unnamed emptiness. But as she looked out the window, seeing the fog had lifted and dawn's faint light filtering through the glass, she knew she couldn't forget him so easily. Grace tossed the pen into a drawer, slamming it shut as if closing a door in her heart. She promised herself she wouldn't think of James again, a stranger who'd entered her life like a gust of wind and vanished like the fog. But deep down, she felt a small crack, a premonition that that night wasn't just a moment of weakness, but the start of something bigger, more painful, and more beautiful than she'd ever imagined. Welcome to Soul Stories. Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a "I am happy" in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. Chapter 2. Traces in the Fog. Fog draped East London like a murky gray veil, so dense that the narrow streets were reduced to faint outlines in the damp darkness. Inside a dilapidated third-floor apartment in an aging tenement building, Grace Evans sat hunched on a rickety wooden chair, her trembling hands clutching a pregnancy test. 2 red lines stood out starkly, like a knife slicing through the fragile shell she'd built to hide her fear. 2 months had passed since that night by the fireplace at the Rusty Anchor, and she tried to bury the memory of James Harrow, the mysterious man with deep, sad eyes and a warm, low voice. But now this truth dragged him back, if only in her mind. Grace was no longer just a girl scraping by to cover rent each day. This morning, at a cheap clinic in Bethnal Green, a doctor had confirmed what she couldn't bring herself to believe. She was pregnant with quadruplets. Very rare, the elderly doctor had said in a dry tone, pushing his slipping glasses up his nose. But dangerous. You need to eat well, rest plenty, or neither you nor the babies might make it. Grace had only nodded, her gray-blue eyes hollow, her hand gripping a crumpled ultrasound paper she hastily stuffed into the pocket of her worn-out coat. 4 babies. 4 lives she hadn't asked for, from a man she'd met just once. A man who'd vanished like the fog that morning. She kept it from Lily, her younger sister. Lily Evans, 19, was a literature student at Queen Mary University, always lost in a world of books and dreams. She had light brown hair like Grace, but her green eyes shone brighter, sparkling with a hope Grace had long since lost. Lily didn't know how much her sister had sacrificed. Sleepless night shifts, skipped meals to pay tuition, and the times Grace silently wept in the kitchen corner, thinking of their mother who died of lung disease 3 years ago. But what Lily didn't know, and Grace never wanted her to find out, was the congenital heart defect Lily had carried since childhood. Doctors had said it wasn't too severe, a small hole in her heart, manageable with a stress-free life and good health. But every time Lily coughed or seemed unusually tired, Grace's heart clenched with dread. "You're back?" Lily's voice called from the bedroom, snapping Grace out of her chaotic thoughts. She quickly hid the test in her coat pocket and stood with a forced smile. "Yeah, just got back from the market," Grace lied, keeping her tone steady. "Finished your homework yet?" "Almost," Lily replied, stepping out with Wuthering Heights in hand, her cheeks flushed from the room's chill. "Did you hear? My professor said my writing's good. Maybe I'll submit a short story to a magazine." "That's great," Grace said, but her gaze darted away. "I'll go make some tea." She turned to the kitchen corner, pouring cold water into the kettle, trying to focus on the sound of it boiling to drown out the fear screaming inside her. But as she set it on the stove, a wave of dizziness hit, forcing her to grip the table to keep from falling. Grace bit her lip, telling herself to stay strong. She couldn't abandon these 4 lives, though they'd come from a moment of weakness, though their father was a man she'd never truly known. But how could she raise them when Lily still needed medicine, still needed money to survive these freezing winter days? Meanwhile, far from Grace's slum, James Harrow sat in a luxurious office on the 45th floor of a glass tower in Canary Wharf. The expansive room overlooked the fog-shrouded Thames, with a polished walnut desk and computer screens flashing financial data from around the globe. Harrow and Sons, the financial empire his father had left behind, was now his. A billion-pound dynasty he'd managed from the US for the past 15 years. He'd returned to London just last week, bringing an expensive suitcase and a wordless loneliness. James couldn't forget Grace. Her smile, soft yet tinged with sorrow, haunted him every time he closed his eyes. That night by the rusty Anchor's fireplace, he'd found something he thought he'd lost long ago. Genuine warmth. But the next morning as dawn pierced the fog, he'd left like a coward. He was afraid. Afraid that if he stayed, he wouldn't be able to leave her. Afraid she'd draw him into a world where his past pain would resurface. He'd lost his brother Thomas in a car accident 15 years ago. A rainy night when he'd driven too fast on a slick Yorkshire road. Thomas, his 18-year-old brother with a radiant smile, was gone forever, leaving James with guilt he couldn't erase. Today, sitting in his cold office, James couldn't take it anymore. He opened a drawer, pulled out an old handkerchief, a keepsake from his mother, who died when he was young, and recalled the feel of Grace's hand on his. "I have to find her," he muttered, his voice hoarse from sleeplessness and an unnamed emptiness. He called his personal assistant, Peter, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a monotone voice. "Find a girl named Grace, works at the Rusty Anchor in East London. I need to know where she is." Peter frowned over the phone. "Sir, East London's huge, and just a first name." "Find her," James cut in, his tone firm, his green eyes flashing with resolve. "Hire a detective if you have to. I don't care about the cost." He hung up, staring out the window. Fog obscured the horizon, but all he saw was Grace's face in his memory. He wondered what she was doing. whether she remembered him as he did her. He didn't know that her life had changed forever because of that night, that she now carried 4 lives, a legacy of their fleeting passion. Back in East London, Grace faced a brutal reality. A week after learning she was pregnant, she was sacked from the Rusty Anchor. "You're pregnant, you can't wait tables." The pub's owner, Stan, a squat fat man with a patchy beard, said without even looking at her, "I don't pay people who don't work." Grace didn't argue, just quietly gathered her apron and a few personal items, leaving with feet heavy as lead. The fog's chill seeped through her thin coat, but she felt nothing beyond the growing fear in her chest. She found new work soon after, a night cleaning shift at a Tesco supermarket a few streets from home. The job was grueling and low-paying, but she had no choice. Each night she mopped floors, pushed carts, and hid her growing belly under an oversized coat. Her health crumbled. She ate little, slept less, and back pain began to flare, sometimes so sharp she had to stop, panting in a dark corner of the store. But she didn't dare quit. Lily needed tuition money, needed heart medication Grace secretly bought from a cheap pharmacy, and the 4 lives inside her needed her to survive. Lily started noticing something was off. One evening, as Grace dragged herself home after a shift, she found Lily on the sofa, pale and clutching her chest. "What's wrong with you?" Lily asked, her voice weak, her green eyes worried. "Are you too tired? Don't worry about me. I'm just a bit short of breath." Grace knelt beside her, hands shaking as she checked Lily's breathing. "Have you taken your meds?" she asked urgently. "Yeah," Lily replied with a faint smile. "Don't worry, the doctor said I'm fine if I don't overdo it." But Grace wasn't reassured. She knew Lily's heart condition could flare up any time without proper care. "I'll make you some tea," she said, standing on aching legs, hiding the dizziness washing over her. In the kitchen, a sharp cramp in her belly forced her to grip the counter, cold sweat beating on her forehead. "Don't fall," she whispered to herself. "Don't let Lily see." James, meanwhile, made no progress in finding Grace. The detective he'd hired, a middle-aged man named George with a thick Cockney accent, reported over the phone. "She quit the pub, didn't leave an address. East London's full of people like that. No names, no traces. I need more time." James slammed his fist on the desk, anger mixing with regret. "How much longer?" he growled. "A few weeks, maybe more," George replied, "unless you give me something more specific." James hung up, stood, and walked to the window. He stared at the foggy Thames, wondering where Grace was. He remembered the smell of burning wood from the fireplace, her gentle voice talking about Lily, the warmth of her touch on his hand. He'd lost her once, and now he feared he'd never find her again. But he didn't know she was closer than he thought, in a world apart, a world of poverty, despair, and burdens she couldn't share. One late-month night, the fog was thicker than ever. Grace trudged home after her shift, feet numb, mind spinning. She hadn't eaten all day, surviving on a cup of cold tap water from the store. The chill cut through her thin coat, but she no longer had the strength to shiver. Crossing a dark alley near home, a violent wave of dizziness struck. She grabbed a wet brick wall, but her weak hands couldn't hold her. "No, not now," she rasped, trying to push on for Lily, who might be struggling to breathe at home. But darkness swallowed her, and she collapsed onto the cold pavement, fog cloaking her small frame. A passerby, an old woman pushing a cart of trash bags, found her, shouting for an ambulance. "She's pregnant! Look! Hurry!" Grace was rushed to Whitechapel's NHS hospital, unconscious, unaware that fate was about to bring James back into her life. The next morning, James sat in his office, flipping through the Evening Standard. A small headline on page 3 stopped his heart. "Pregnant woman with quadruplets hospitalized after collapse in East London." He read fast, each word stabbing his chest. No name, but instinct told him it was Grace. He threw the paper down, grabbed his coat, and bolted from the office. "Get the car," he barked to his driver over the phone, voice urgent. "Take me to Whitechapel now." As the sleek black Bentley glided through London's foggy streets, James clenched his fists, torn between worry and hope. He didn't know where Grace was in the hospital, but one thing was certain. If it was her, he wouldn't lose her again. Chapter 3. Hospital Lights. Fog clung to the windows of the NHS hospital in Whitechapel, forming faint streaks of water that rolled down the cold glass. Inside the emergency ward, stark fluorescent lights illuminated a long hallway, their glow reflecting off scratched, glossy tiles. The steady beeping of machines blended with the hurried footsteps of nurses, creating a chilling, lifeless melody. James Harrow stood at the end of the corridor, his hands gripping the edge of his overcoat, his green eyes fixed on the emergency room door with palpable worry. The Bentley had whisked him here from Canary Wharf in just 20 minutes, but each second of waiting now stretched like a century. He'd read the headline in the Evening Standard, "Pregnant woman with quadruplets hospitalized after collapse in East London," and a gut feeling told him it was Grace. No name, no details, but his heart raced as if it knew something his mind hadn't yet accepted. When he stormed into the hospital, demanding to see the woman from the article, a young nurse with tightly tied hair had led him here, saying curtly, "She's in the ER. She's not doing well." James hadn't asked more, just stood still, waiting, his chest heavy with regret and fear. He wasn't certain it was Grace, but if it was, he'd never forgive himself for leaving that morning. The ER door swung open, and a woman in her 50s stepped out. She wore a white coat, her salt and pepper hair pulled back neatly, her sharp brown eyes radiating sternness, tempered with warmth. Her name tag read, Dr. Margaret Holmes. She looked at James, frowning as she took in his presence, his expensive overcoat, polished leather shoes, and anxious eyes that couldn't be concealed. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low and clear, carrying the tone of someone used to giving orders. I think I know her," James replied, his voice hoarse, gesturing toward the door. "Is her name Grace Evans?" Dr. Holmes raised an eyebrow, sizing him up from head to toe. The costly coat, the shine of his shoes, the raw concern in his gaze. "Are you family?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "Not exactly," James admitted, lowering his head. "But I need to know how she is. Please." Dr. Holmes sighed, nodding slightly. "Follow me," she said, leading him to a quiet corner of the hallway, away from the clamor of the ER. "She's Grace Evans, yes. Pregnant with quadruplets, about 25 weeks. Critical condition, severe anemia, malnutrition, and she collapsed from exhaustion. We're giving her a transfusion and stabilizing her, but she's very weak. Without proper care, both she and the babies are at risk." James felt his head spin. "Pregnant with quadruplets," he echoed, his voice trembling. He quickly calculated, 2 months since that night at the Rusty Anchor. The timing matched perfectly, and a painful truth stabbed his heart. Those children might be his. He looked at Dr. Holmes, eyes wide with shock. Is she awake? Can I see her?" "Not yet," she replied firmly. "She just came to, but she's fragile. I'm not letting anyone in except family, and she says she has none. Just a sister at home. What are you to her?" James hesitated, unsure how to answer. What was he to Grace? A stranger? A mistake in the foggy night? Or a father who'd never known his own children? I'm the one responsible," he finally said, his voice dropping. "I need to stay. If she needs anything, hospital bills, medicine, I'll cover it." Dr. Holmes studied him, her gaze probing. "I don't care who you are or how rich you might be," she said. "She needs rest, not drama. If you want to help, stay here, but don't disturb her." James nodded, sinking onto a hard plastic chair in the hallway, his heart heavy. Through the small window in the ER door, he glimpsed Grace lying motionless on the bed, surrounded by IV lines and an oxygen tube. Her belly was pronounced under the thin blanket, a clear sign of the life he'd unwittingly left behind. He wondered what she'd endured these past 2 months and why he hadn't been there when she needed him most. Inside the ER, Grace awoke to a vague ache. The harsh white lights made her wince, her weak hands instinctively reaching for her stomach. She heard the steady beep of the heart monitor, felt the dull pain spreading through her body, but her first thought was of Lily. "Lily!" she rasped, her voice rough, trying to sit up but stopped by a firm hand pressing her down. "Stay still, doctor." Margaret Holmes's voice cut through, stern yet caring. "You collapsed on the street, nearly died from anemia. If someone hadn't brought you in, you and your 4 babies wouldn't have made it." Grace opened her eyes, staring at the doctor with panic. 4? Are they still okay?" she asked, her voice quivering. "They're fine, but you're not," Dr. Holmes replied, checking the chart in her hand. "You're severely malnourished, low blood pressure, exhausted. What have you been doing to get like this? Doesn't anyone look after you?" Grace bit her lip, turning her face away. "I can manage," she said, her voice cold but faint. "As long as the babies are okay, that's enough." Dr. Holmes sighed, setting the chart down. "There's a man outside asking to see you. Says his name's James, claims he'll cover the bills. Do you know him?" Grace froze, her heart pounding so hard it stole her breath. James. His name hit her like a blade, slicing through the icy wall she'd built to protect herself. "No," she lied, her voice hardening. "I don't know him. Don't let him in." Dr. Holmes frowned but didn't press. "All right, rest. I'll check on you later." She left, leaving Grace alone with her swirling thoughts. She closed her eyes, trying to banish James's image. The man who'd swept into her life like a gust of wind, then left without a word. What was he doing here? Why show up now, when she'd resolved to face everything alone? She didn't need him, didn't need his pity, didn't need help from someone who'd abandoned her without a backward glance. James stood in the hallway, burning with impatience. When Dr. Holmes returned, she gave him an unreadable look. "She doesn't want to see you," she said bluntly, "but I'll let you stay if you insist. Just don't bother her." James nodded, feeling the sting like a fresh wound. He didn't blame Grace. He deserved her coldness, but he couldn't leave. "What does she need?" he asked. "Hospital bills, medicine, anything. I'll take care of it." Dr. Holmes nodded. "I'll list the costs, but if you really want to help, let her decide when, or if, she's ready to see you." James sank back into the chair, pulling a business card from his wallet and scribbling a brief note. "Grace, I'm James Harrow. I'm sorry I left. I didn't know about the babies, but I'm here now. I'll wait for you, as long as it takes." He handed it to a nurse to deliver, then quietly paid the hospital fees at the front desk. He didn't know if Grace would read it, but he had to do something, even a small step to atone for his mistake. Grace was discharged the next morning, still weak but determined to get home. Dr. Holmes had prescribed blood supplements and ordered rest, but she had no time for that. Lily was waiting, and she couldn't let her sister know she'd nearly died. As a taxi took her back to East London's slums, she found Lily on the sofa, pale and clutching her chest. "Sis!" Lily rushed to her, tears streaming down. "Where were you all night? I was so worried. I called, but no one answered." Grace hugged her, guilt flooding through. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "I fainted, had to go to the hospital." Lily's eyes dropped to Grace's stomach, widening. You're pregnant?" she whispered, her trembling hand brushing against Grace. "Why didn't you tell me?" Grace turned away, avoiding the question. "I can handle it," she said. But Lily grabbed her hand, sobbing. "You don't have to do it alone. Someone named James called, said he'd help. Sis, give him a chance. I don't want to lose you like we lost Mom." Grace's voice sharpened, pulling her hand free. "I don't trust anyone anymore," she said, her tone icy, but inside a crack widened. James's business card sat heavy in her coat pocket, a promise she didn't dare believe. Chapter 4. Climax in the Stormy Night. The storm crashed into East London like a snarling beast, bringing torrential rain and howling winds that tore through the narrow alleys, rattling the brittle window frames of the dilapidated apartment where Grace Evans lived. 7 months had passed since that foggy night at the Rusty Anchor, and now her swollen belly was the starkest evidence of what had transpired. 4 lives grew within her, quadruplets, each faint kick a reminder that she no longer lived just for herself. But tonight, her thoughts weren't on them, nor on James Harrow, nor anything else. Every shred of her focus was on Lily, her younger sister, curled up on the threadbare double bed, her face pale and lips tinged blue. "Lily, how are you?" Grace knelt by the bed, her trembling hand pressing against her sister's forehead. Hot, scorching enough to feel like a burn. Lily coughed violently, each rasp tearing through her frail chest, and Grace knew this wasn't just a common cold. Lily's congenital heart defect, which doctors had deemed manageable with care, had merged with a raging fever, turning into a lethal threat. "I'm calling an ambulance," Grace said, her voice shaking. But as she reached for her phone, the screen was black. Battery dead since the afternoon, and the power in the house was out from the storm. She rushed to the window, peering at the flooded street below. Water surged over the sidewalks, sweeping along trash and debris in the gusting wind. No ambulance could reach them in this weather. No one could help her. Grace turned back to Lily, watching her gasp for air, her pale green eyes dimming with pain. "Sis, I'm so tired," Lily whispered, and Grace felt her heart shatter. She had no money, no way to get Lily to a hospital, except for one last resort she'd avoided for 2 months. Grace pulled James's business card from her coat pocket, her shaking hands dialing the number on the payphone in the building's hallway. It rang 3 times, each chime stretching like an eternity, until his low voice answered. "Hello?" "James," Grace choked out, tears spilling unnoticed down her face. "I need you. My sister, Lily. She's burning up. I can't afford to get her to the hospital. Please." "Grace?" James's voice sharpened with urgency. "Where are you? I'm coming now." "East London, the tenement on Brick Lane," she replied, her voice breaking. "Hurry, I don't know how long she can hold on." She hung up, racing back to hold Lily, trying to keep her conscious. "I'm here, Lily. Don't sleep. James is coming," she whispered, though deep down she didn't dare believe he'd make it in time. The wind howled outside, rain pounding the glass as if it meant to shatter everything, and Grace felt the world itself was against her. James Harrow bolted from his luxurious Mayfair apartment, not bothering with a coat, grabbing only his car keys. The storm had snarled traffic across London, but he didn't care. He sped the Bentley through waterlogged streets, its headlights dim in the thick downpour. Grace's voice on the phone, cracking with fear, pierced his heart like a blade. He'd left her alone too long, and now she was begging for his help. He couldn't fail again, not like with Thomas, his brother, who died in his hands 15 years ago. The drive to Brick Lane was a nightmare. Water reached knee-high in spots, cars gridlocked, and gusts so fierce he gripped the wheel to keep from skidding. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, roaring, "Come on, damn it!" But the storm didn't relent, and by the time he reached the tenement, it was nearly midnight. He charged up the stairs, rainwater dripping from his hair onto the floor, and pounded on Grace's door. Grace flung it open, her face ghostly white, eyes red-rimmed. "You're here," she whispered, but there was no time for more. She pointed to Lily, now unconscious on the bed, her breaths shallow as a candle about to flicker out. James didn't hesitate, scooping Lily up, feeling her small, cold body in his arms. "We've got to get her to a hospital," he said, his voice firm but his eyes brimming with dread. They rushed outside, Grace staggering behind, her heavy belly slowing her down. The streets were flooded, and James's Bentley was trapped among stalled cars. "No good," he muttered, scanning around. He carried Lily, running through the storm on foot. Grace trailing, rain stinging her face like needles. But they didn't get far. Traffic was completely jammed, and Whitechapel Hospital was over a mile away. James shouted for an ambulance over his phone, but the signal faltered, the storm severing all connections. When they found shelter under the awning of an abandoned shop, Lily stopped breathing. Grace screamed, lunging to hold her, but James held her back, checking Lily's pulse with trembling hands. "No! No! No!" Grace sobbed, wrenching free, clutching her sister's cold body. "If you'd been faster, she'd still be alive. Why didn't you come sooner?" James knelt beside her, rain mingling with tears on his face. "I'm sorry, Grace," he said, his voice breaking. "I tried. I can't lose you too." He pulled her into his arms, letting her pound his chest, letting the rain soak them both. Grace wailed in his embrace, the pain of losing Lily slicing through her last defenses. Amid this, another figure emerged in the storm. Tom Carter, Grace's ex-boyfriend, stepped from a nearby alley, his torn coat drenched. At 28, His gaunt face and sly, narrow eyes betrayed a calculating mind. Tom had abandoned Grace when her mother died, leaving her to bear debts and grief alone, and now he returned like a vulture scenting opportunity. He'd heard rumors in the neighborhood about James, a wealthy man tied to Grace. "Grace, you okay?" Tom called, his tone oily as he approached. Grace looked up, her red eyes blazing with fury. "Get lost, Tom," she snapped, holding Lily tighter. "Oi, calm down," Tom said, glancing at James. "Just want to help. But who's this rich bloke? If he can't take care of you, I can, for a small price." He smirked, his gaze lingering on Grace's belly. "I know the papers would love this. A billionaire and a poor pregnant girl. I could make a killing." James stood, his eyes ice cold. "Get out of here before I make you regret it," he growled, fists clenched. Tom sneered but backed off when he saw the ferocity in James's stare, muttering, "Fine, but I'll be back," before vanishing into the rain. The storm hadn't yet eased when another crisis struck. Grace suddenly clutched her stomach, screaming from a sharp, wrenching pain. "James!" she gasped, clawing at him, tears mixing with rain. I think I'm giving birth." James panicked, lifting her and running through the downpour for help. An ambulance finally appeared, its lights cutting through the fog, and they were rushed to Whitechapel Hospital. In the vehicle, Grace gripped James's hand, sobbing, "Don't let me lose anyone else." He squeezed back, his heart in agony, powerless but praying. At the hospital, Grace went into premature labor amid the storm. 4 tiny babies were born, fragile, their thin cries like whispers in the rain. Dr. Margaret Holmes led the nurses in a desperate fight to save them, but 2, Rose and Charlie, didn't survive, their small hearts stopping minutes after birth. Grace screamed when she heard, her body trembling on the bed, clutching the 2 surviving babies, Emma and Oliver, as if terrified they'd slip away too. James stood outside the delivery room, watching through the glass, tears falling silently. He saw Grace cradling Emma and Oliver, sobbing uncontrollably, her face ashen with exhaustion and grief. He wanted to go in, to hold her, but he stayed rooted, blaming himself for not doing more. Lily was gone, 2 babies were gone, and he didn't know if Grace could forgive him or herself after all that had happened in this stormy night. James stood outside the delivery room, watching through the glass, tears falling silently. He saw Grace cradling Emma and Oliver, sobbing uncontrollably, her face ashen with exhaustion and grief. He wanted to go in, to hold her, but he stayed rooted, blaming himself for not doing more. Lily was gone, 2 babies were gone, and he didn't know if Grace could forgive him or herself after all that had happened in this stormy night. Chapter 5. Ashes and Embers. The small house on the outskirts of London sat quietly along an oak-lined road, far from the flooded alleys and the storm's howling that had taken Lily, Rose, and Charlie from Grace Evans. It wasn't grand, a single-story cottage with a weathered gray-tiled roof, red brick walls draped in withered ivy amid winter's grip, and a modest fireplace in the living room casting a feeble warmth. But to Grace, it was a world apart from the decrepit East London flat. James Harrow had bought it days after the tragedy of that stormy night, offering little explanation beyond a curt, "You need a safe place for Emma and Oliver." Grace didn't protest. She was too exhausted, too broken to argue. But she didn't thank him either. She simply stayed silent, her gray-blue eyes hollow like ashes after a fire, the light in them seemingly swept away by the storm forever. On her first day in the new house, Grace sat curled in an old armchair by the fireplace, clutching Emma and Oliver tightly. The 2 babies, her surviving children, were so small she feared a strong breath might harm them. Emma, with soft, light brown hair like silk, slept peacefully in her left arm, her tiny lips twitching as if dreaming. Oliver, his green eyes half open as if watching his mother, nestled in her right, his minuscule hand gripping her forefinger. They were all she had left after that night, after Lily stopped breathing in her arms, after Rose and Charlie slipped away before she could name them, before she could hold them even once. Grace gazed at them, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. But she didn't sob aloud. She had no strength left to cry, no strength for anything but holding Emma and Oliver, as if they were her last tether to life. James stood in the corner of the room, watching quietly. He wore a plain gray sweater, a far cry from the expensive suits of their first meeting at the Rusty Anchor. But his face still carried that unchanging melancholy, his deep green eyes reflecting a pain he never voiced. He didn't know what to say to Grace. Every apology felt meaningless against her suffering, every comfort hollow against losses that couldn't be undone. He did what he could, mixing formula for Emma and Oliver from supplies he'd bought at a nearby supermarket, washing diapers by hand in the small sink, and keeping the fire going so the house wouldn't grow too cold in the damp outskirts of London. Grace didn't look at him, didn't speak to him, but she didn't send him away either. Her silence was an invisible wall, and James accepted his place behind it, waiting for a day she might open up, though that day might never come. A week passed in a heavy shroud of mourning. James stepped away from Harrow & Sons, the billion-pound financial empire he'd run from the US for 15 years. He called his assistant, Peter, his voice cutting through any objections. "I'm not coming back to the office for a long time. Find someone to replace me if you have to. I don't care." Peter stammered about shareholders and profits, but James hung up before hearing him out. The numbers on screens and meetings at Canary Wharf no longer mattered. All he wanted was to be near Grace, even if she didn't need him, even if she might never forgive him for failing to save Lily, for not arriving sooner in the storm. Each night when Grace dozed off in the armchair from exhaustion, James stayed awake to tend to Emma and Oliver. He gently lifted them from her arms, placing them in a wooden crib he'd assembled from a second-hand shop nearby. He sang lullabies he'd heard his mother sing to Thomas, his late brother, years ago, his low voice resonating through the quiet house, mingling with the crackle of the fire. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." He wasn't good at singing. His voice was rough, sometimes off-key, but Emma and Oliver seemed to like it, their tiny eyes gradually closing in peaceful sleep. Grace sometimes woke in the night, seeing him there, the firelight softening the sharp lines of his face, and a strange feeling crept into her, a warmth she'd forgotten from days when her mother was alive, when loss hadn't yet defined her. One evening, when Emma cried for milk, James brought a bottle, but Grace snatched it from him, her voice cold. "I can do it myself." He said nothing, just sat on the worn sofa across from her, watching as she fed the baby with clumsy but loving hands. She poured the formula, tested the temperature on her wrist as a nurse had taught her, then cradled Emma, gently coaxing her to drink. Oliver lay in the crib, his green eyes, eerily like James's, fixed on her, and Grace felt her heart tighten. Those eyes mirrored the man sitting before her, the man she both wanted to push away and pull closer. After a long silence, James spoke, his voice a whisper in the stillness. "I had a brother, Thomas. He died because of me." Grace looked up, her eyes flickering, her hands pausing as they rocked Emma. "How did he die?" she asked, her voice hoarse from sleeplessness and the lingering ache within, the first time she'd responded to him since the storm. James bowed his head, gripping the sofa's edge until his knuckles whitened. "I was driving that night 15 years ago," he began, his voice trembling as if each word was a self-inflicted wound. "In Yorkshire, on a narrow road through the fields. It was pouring, the road slick, and I was going too fast. The car spun out, hit a tree. Thomas, he was next to me, just 18, always smiling despite everything. He didn't make it. I survived, but I've never forgiven myself. I left England after that, ran away, like I did with you." Grace stared at him, her eyes blurring with tears. His words were a mirror to her own pain. She'd lost Lily, blamed herself for not doing enough, not acting fast enough to save her. "Do you think telling me that will make me forgive you for Lily?" she asked, her voice quaking, her grip tightening on the bottle until it shook. "No," James replied, meeting her gaze, his green eyes glinting in the firelight. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I understand what it's like to lose someone you love. I couldn't save Lily, couldn't save Rose and Charlie. But I'm here for you, Grace. I'm not going anywhere. Even if you push me away, I'll stay." Grace didn't answer immediately. She turned away, hugging Emma and Oliver closer, tears falling silently onto their hair. But his words stirred the ashes in her heart, igniting a faint spark, a hope she didn't dare acknowledge. She said nothing, but for the first time in days, she didn't tell him to leave. Time passed slowly, and Grace's walls began to soften. She saw James staying up to sing to the babies, his warm voice filling the silence, his large hands cradling Emma and Oliver with a tenderness she hadn't expected. He'd given up everything, his job, his wealth, his Mayfair life, to be with her, asking nothing, demanding nothing. He bought a small teddy bear for Emma, a toy car for Oliver, fixed a leaking pipe in the kitchen without being asked, and quietly set hot meals, toast with butter, potato soup, in front of her, though she rarely touched them. His patience unsettled her. She was used to abandonment, from her mother's death, from Tom Carter's desertion when she needed him most, from a life that kept striking her with blow after blow. But James didn't leave, and that scared her. Scared her that if she let him in, she'd lose everything again, like she'd lost Lily, Rose, and Charlie. One night, as Emma and Oliver slept soundly in their crib, Grace lay on the armchair, drifting into a dream amid the chill of the suburban London winter. She saw Lily, Rose, and Charlie standing in a fog-draped field, a soft light illuminating their faces. Lily smiled, her green eyes bright as they'd been in life, and said, "Live for Emma and Oliver, sis. Don't be sad anymore." Rose and Charlie, the babies she'd never held, waved, their tiny eyes twinkling as if to comfort her, as if to say they didn't blame her. Grace jolted awake, tears streaming down her face, and saw James by the fireplace, the glow catching his features, his eyes red as if he'd been crying too. She stood walking toward him, her legs trembling as if they might give out. "James," she whispered, her voice breaking with tears and an unnamed fear. He looked up, concern flooding his gaze. "Grace, what's wrong?" he asked, rising to steady her as she swayed. She didn't answer, just threw herself into his arms, sobbing, "Don't leave me. I can't take losing anyone else." James held her tight, his tears falling into her hair, his breath shuddering against her ear. "I'm not going anywhere, Grace," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear I'll never leave you." They kissed, a slow but fierce kiss, like a flame flaring from the ashes of their painful days. Grace felt his warmth, a safety she hadn't known since her mother's death, since she'd learned to live without trusting anyone. James pulled her closer, his hand gently tracing her back through her thin sweater, and in that moment they found each other amid the pain, a fragile yet powerful love, sprouting from irreparable losses, from wounds only time and patience could heal. That peace lasted a few days, but shadows from the past wouldn't let them rest. One afternoon, while James was out buying formula and diapers, Grace heard urgent knocking. She opened the door, and Tom Carter stood there, his gaunt face haggard under a soaked coat, his narrow eyes glinting with calculation. "Grace, long time no see," he said, his sleazy grin chilling her spine. "Heard you're doing well with that billionaire guy, huh? Nice house." "Get lost, Tom," Grace snapped, gripping the door frame, her eyes blazing with fury. "I've got nothing for you." "Oi, don't rush," Tom said, stepping closer, the stench of liquor on his breath forcing her back. "I know him. James Harrow, right? Big shot billionaire. I've got mates in the press who'd eat this up. A poor girl knocked up by a tycoon. I just want a little cash, or all of London will know who you are, and he won't like that." Grace trembled with rage and fear. "You wouldn't dare," she said, her voice shaking but trying to stay firm. "James will make you regret it if you try." Tom smirked, his gaze sliding over her now flat stomach, then into the house where Emma and Oliver slept. "We'll see," he said, his tone dropping into a threat. "I'm not in a hurry, but I'll be back, Grace. Think it over." He turned, disappearing into the afternoon fog, leaving Grace with a pounding heart full of dread. When James returned, she told him everything, tears streaming down her face. "He won't stop," she said, her voice quivering. "He ditched me when my mom died, and now he's back to ruin me. I don't want you or the babies dragged into this." James took her hand, his eyes icy but his voice gentle. He won't touch you or the kids. I'll handle it. James tightened security the next morning. He hired guards to watch the house, installed cameras at the gate in hidden corners, and reported Tom to the police, though he knew a man like that wouldn't be easily caught. He knelt beside Grace, holding her hand firmly, his green eyes locking onto hers. "I swear I'll keep this family safe," he said, his voice resolute. "Do you trust me?" Grace looked at him, seeing the sincerity and fear of losing her in his gaze. She nodded, her voice soft but certain. "I trust you." For the first time after so much loss, she chose to place her full faith in James, the man who'd entered her life in a foggy night and was now all she had to lean on, to rebuild from the ashes. Chapter 6. Beneath London's Eternal Rain. A gentle drizzle fell over the Thames, tiny droplets shimmering under the soft glow of golden streetlights, casting a delicate veil over the small house where Grace and James Harrow lived. 3 years had passed since that fateful stormy night. 3 years since Grace lost Lily, Rose, and Charlie. Since she found a flicker of light in the ashes through James's embrace. The riverside house wasn't grand, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room with an old fireplace, and a modest garden where wildflowers sprouted amid the grass. But to Grace, it was everything, a place where she rebuilt her life from the fragments. Today was their wedding day, a quiet ceremony by the Thames under a light drizzle and a hazy sunset. There were no throngs of guests, no lavish gown or extravagant feast, just Grace in a simple white knee-length dress, James in a plain gray suit, and their children, Emma and Oliver, darting around them with radiant smiles. An elderly priest from a nearby church stood beneath a large umbrella, reciting a brief vow. "Do you promise to stand by each other, in wealth or poverty, in health or sickness, until death do you part?" Grace nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, mingling with the rain. "I do," she said, her voice trembling but firm. James took her hand, his green eyes gleaming through the mist. "I do." By the riverbank, they placed a small granite memorial plaque engraved with the names Lily, Rose, and Charlie, and the words, "Forever in our hearts." Emma, now 3, her light brown hair tied in 2 small braids, laid a bunch of white daisies on it, whispering, "Hi, Aunt Lily, Charlie, Rose." Oliver, slightly taller than his sister, his green eyes, James's eyes twinkling with mischief, tugged at Grace's hand. "Mummy, are they happy?" Grace knelt, hugging them both, crying through a smile. "Yes, my loves, they're smiling at us." James stood behind her, a hand on her shoulder, his gaze tender, yet tinged with an unspoken sorrow. He'd stepped away from Harrow & Sons 2 years ago, handing the billion-pound financial empire to a new management team to focus on his family. Instead, he founded a charity called Lily's Light, aiding London's orphans, inspired by Grace, by her story with Lily. "I don't care about money or power anymore," he told her one night by the fireplace. "I just want us to live truly, Grace. For Lily, for Rose, for Charlie, and for Emma and Oliver." She'd nodded, holding his hand, knowing he wasn't just the man who'd entered her life on a foggy night, but the one who'd given her a reason to keep going. Emma and Oliver grew up healthy in the riverside home. Emma, with her light brown hair and gentle nature, loved drawing and weaving tales, stories of Aunt Lily she conjured from Grace's memories. Oliver, with his playful green eyes and boundless energy, raced through the garden, chasing sparrows along the riverbank. They called James Dad naturally, as if he'd always been their father. Each evening, as drizzle pattered against the windows, James sat in the armchair, reading to them. The Wind in the Willows, or Peter Pan, his warm voice blending with the rain's soft rhythm. Grace stood in the kitchen, peering through the small window, watching James cradle Emma and Oliver, a strange warmth filling her chest. She'd learned to live again, not to forget the pain, but to carry it as part of her. A reminder to cherish what remained. James had changed her, and she him. He was no longer the cold billionaire fleeing his past, but a father, a husband, a man who'd sacrifice everything for their little family. Yet their happiness wasn't without trials. One drizzly late winter day, As Emma and Oliver played in the garden under Grace's watch, Tom Carter, her ex-boyfriend, re-emerged like a ghost from the past. He'd lurked in East London's shadows for 3 years, scraping by, but greed and envy of James drew him back. That day, Grace let Oliver dash to the gate to retrieve a ball that rolled into the road, her eyes off him for mere seconds. When she turned back, he was gone. A crumpled note lay on the grass, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Bring £50,000 to the Whitechapel vacant lot at midnight, or the boy dies." Grace screamed, racing to the gate, but Tom and Oliver had vanished into the rain. She called James, her voice breaking. "James, Tom took Oliver. He wants money. You have to save him." James rushed home from the charity office, his face ashen, hands trembling as he read the note. "I'll go," he said, his voice like steel. "Call the police, Grace. But I'm not waiting. I have to get Oliver now." Grace clutched his hand, sobbing. "Don't let me lose you. I can't take it." He kissed her forehead, whispering, "I'll bring him back, I swear." James drove to the Whitechapel lot, the drizzle blurring the windshield, but he didn't care. He carried a bag with £50,000, hastily withdrawn from the bank, though he knew Tom couldn't be trusted. When he arrived, Tom stood there, Oliver's hands bound, his green eyes wide with fear. "Dad!" the boy cried upon seeing James, shattering his heart. Tom, his gaunt face scarred, smirked, a gleaming dagger in hand. "Where's the money?" he growled. James tossed the bag to the ground, his eyes icy. "Let him go, Tom. This is between you and me. Don't touch my son." Tom snatched the bag, checked it quickly, then laughed. "Your son?" Hilarious. A billionaire raising a poor whore's kid. "But I don't care, as long as I get paid." He yanked Oliver's ropes, shoving him toward James, but as James lunged to catch him, Tom stabbed the dagger into his back. James collapsed, blood seeping through his coat, but he clung to Oliver, shouting, "Run, son!" Oliver sobbed, gripping him, but James pushed him away, using his last strength to punch Tom, sending him sprawling. The police, alerted by Grace, stormed in at that moment, subduing Tom and rushing James and Oliver to an ambulance. Grace reached the hospital, finding James on a bed, blood soaking through bandages, and she fell beside him, clutching his hand, crying, "You're everything to me. Don't leave me." James opened his eyes, offering a weak smile, his voice raspy. "One rainy night gave me a lifetime, Grace. I'm not going anywhere." He squeezed her hand faintly, and Grace hugged him, tears falling onto his shoulder, her heart swelling with gratitude and indescribable love. Years later, their family lived peacefully by the Thames. Tom was sentenced to a long prison term for kidnapping and assault, no longer a threat. Emma, now 10, grew into a gentle girl, painting pictures of their family in foggy fields, where she believed Lily Rose and Charlie dwelled. Oliver, tall and spirited at 10, ran along the riverbank, vowing to Grace he'd be strong like Dad to protect her. James and Grace ran Lily's Light, expanding the charity to aid hundreds of London orphans, turning their pain into hope for others. Each winter, they stood by the Thames, placing white daisies on the memorial for Lily, Rose, and Charlie. Emma and Oliver scampered nearby, their laughter ringing through the drizzle, and Grace leaned into James, feeling his warmth. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" she asked softly. He kissed her hair, smiling. "No, but I knew from that rainy night you were all I'd ever need." One drizzly afternoon, the family gathered indoors, James reading to Emma and Oliver by the fireplace, Grace brewing tea in the kitchen, gazing at the misty Thames through the window. She smiled, knowing their love, born of an unexpected rainy night, had transcended tragedy and pain to become eternal under London's grey skies. They embraced by the river, drizzle falling lightly, and in that moment, Grace understood that no matter how great the losses, they had each other forever. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.